A hunter in Montana set up a trail camera deep in the woods. When he checked the footage the next morning, someone was standing behind him. The problem was, he had been completely alone, miles from the nearest trail. Tonight, 3 real stories from people who discovered something terrifying. They weren't alone in the woods. If you enjoy real unsettling stories like these, consider subscribing. And before we begin, where are you watching from tonight? Let me know in the comments. Now, turn down the lights, and let's begin. Daniel had been hunting the same stretch of forest in western Montana for almost 10 years. It was quiet land, miles from the nearest town, and most hunters avoided it because the terrain was rough and the trails were poorly marked. But that was exactly why Daniel liked it. Out there, the woods felt untouched. No campsites, no hikers, no people, just thick pine trees and long, silent valleys. That fall, Daniel decided to try something new. Instead of tracking deer the traditional way, he mounted a trail camera to a tree overlooking a narrow game path that cut through the forest. Trail cameras were simple devices. They sat quietly attached to trees and snapped photos whenever something moved in front of them. Usually it was deer, sometimes elk, occasionally a curious raccoon or black bear wandering through the frame. Daniel secured the camera about 6 feet off the ground and angled it toward the path. Then he left the area completely, planning to return the next morning to check the memory card. It was the kind of routine hunters did all the time. Set the camera, leave the woods alone, let nature move normally. The next morning, Daniel hiked back in before sunrise. The forest was cold and still, the kind of quiet that makes every step sound louder than it should. When he reached the camera, he removed the memory card and slipped it into the small screen viewer he carried in his backpack. The first few photos appeared exactly as expected. A deer walking through the frame, then another. A few hours later, a small group of elk. Daniel nodded to himself. The location was perfect. But when the next image appeared on the screen, he stopped walking. The picture showed Daniel standing directly in front of the camera. He recognized the moment immediately. It had been taken when he first set the device the day before. He remembered stepping into the frame while adjusting the angle. That was normal, but something else was in the photo too, behind Daniel. About 20 feet down the trail, someone was standing between the trees. The figure was partially hidden in shadow, but it was clearly a person. Daniel frowned and zoomed in on the image. Maybe it was another hunter passing through. The woods weren't completely private, but the longer he stared at the photo, the more uneasy he felt. The person in the background didn't appear to be walking down the trail. They weren't holding a rifle or wearing hunting gear. They were just standing there, perfectly still, facing the camera. Daniel didn't remember hearing anyone nearby the day before. No footsteps, no voices, nothing. Trying to brush it off, Daniel scrolled to the next image. The timestamp showed it had been taken only 30 seconds later. In this photo, Daniel was no longer in the frame. He had already walked away from the camera after mounting it, but the person in the trees was still there, except now, they were closer. The figure had stepped onto the trail and was moving toward the camera. Daniel's stomach tightened slightly. Maybe the person had been curious about the camera and walked forward to inspect it. That would make sense, except something about the posture looked wrong. The figure's arms were hanging loosely at their sides, their head tilted slightly downward, as if they were staring directly into the lens. The next photo appeared on the screen. The figure was now only a few feet away. Daniel felt a cold sensation run through his chest. The figure's face was still hidden in shadow, but their eyes seemed to be pointed directly toward the camera, toward him. He quickly checked the timestamp again. These photos had been taken yesterday afternoon. That meant whoever this person was, they had been standing just a few feet behind him in the woods while he worked. Daniel scrolled to the next image, and that was when the confusion turned into something else entirely. In this photo, the figure was gone. The trail behind the camera was completely empty. No person, no movement, just the same quiet forest path. He flipped through the remaining photos quickly. Deer, wind-moving branches, empty trail, nothing unusual. Daniel stood there in the woods staring at the screen. If someone had approached the camera and then left, the camera should have captured them walking away. Trail cameras triggered whenever something moved through their field of view. But there were no images of anyone leaving the trail. It was as if the person had simply vanished. Daniel slowly zoomed back to the first photo again, the one where he stood in front of the camera adjusting it. He studied the image more carefully this time. That was when he noticed something he hadn't seen before. The shadowy figure in the background wasn't looking at him. They were looking directly at the camera. And according to the timestamp, that photo had been taken at the exact same moment Daniel was standing in front of the camera. Meaning if the image was accurate, the person in the woods had been standing only a few feet behind him the entire time, watching, completely silent. Some hunters say the woods always feel like they're watching you, but sometimes that feeling might not be your imagination. The next story happened to two hikers who thought they had found the perfect campsite. Mark and Tyler had been hiking most of the afternoon when they finally decided to stop for the night. The trail cut through a dense section of national forest, miles from the nearest road, and by the time the sun began dropping behind the trees, they were both exhausted. Just off the trail, they spotted a small clearing surrounded by tall pines. It looked perfect. Flat ground, no rocks, plenty of space for a tent and a fire. Tyler dropped his backpack and looked around the quiet forest. "Looks like nobody's been here in a while," he said. They set up their tent quickly, while the last light of the day filtered through the trees. Mark gathered fallen branches for a small fire, while Tyler unpacked food from his bag. The forest around them was completely still. No voices, no other hikers passing along the trail, just wind moving softly through the branches high above them. It was exactly the kind of quiet place backpackers look for when they want to escape everything. They ate dinner sitting beside the fire while the sky slowly darkened. The only sounds were the crackle of burning wood and the occasional snap of branches somewhere deeper in the woods. At first, neither of them thought much about it. Forests were full of animals moving through the brush at night. Deer, raccoons, maybe even a black bear wandering through the area. But after a while, Mark began noticing something strange. The footsteps always seemed to stop when they stopped talking. The moment they spoke again, the forest would move. Another quiet crunch of leaves somewhere beyond the trees. Tyler noticed it too after a few minutes. "Probably just deer," he said casually. But Mark wasn't so sure. Animals usually moved through quickly. Whatever was out there seemed to be circling the campsite slowly, step by step, just outside the ring of firelight. Eventually the fire burned low, and the temperature dropped sharply. The two hikers zipped themselves into the tent and settled into their sleeping bags. For a while, everything was quiet again, just wind brushing through the trees. Mark was almost asleep when he heard it, a slow step in the leaves, right outside the tent. Mark opened his eyes and held his breath. Another step followed, then another. Something was walking slowly around the tent. Tyler whispered from the other side of the tent, "You hear that?" Mark nodded even though Tyler couldn't see him. The footsteps moved carefully through the leaves, circling them once, then twice. Whatever it wasn't rushing past the campsite. It was staying. Mark reached slowly for the flashlight beside his sleeping bag but didn't turn it on yet. Both men stayed completely silent, listening. The footsteps stopped directly beside the tent wall. Then they heard something else. Breathing. Slow, steady, just inches from the fabric. Tyler slowly whispered, "Is it a bear?" Mark didn't answer. Bears moved heavier than that, and they didn't usually circle a campsite quietly like this. The breathing continued for a few seconds more. Then suddenly the footsteps began again, moving away from the tent and back into the darkness of the forest. Both men stayed completely still. Neither of them slept. The next sound came almost an hour later, a soft metallic noise. Mark's eyes opened immediately. It sounded like a zipper, very slowly sliding open. Mark grabbed the flashlight and snapped it on instantly. The beam hit the tent door. The zipper was still closed. Nothing outside, just the empty forest staring back at them. Tyler exhaled slowly. Maybe we imagined it, but neither of them really believed that. Morning finally came and the forest returned to its normal quiet calm. The hikers stepped out of the tent and stretched in the cool air. At first, everything looked normal. Then Tyler pointed toward the trees. About 50 feet away, another tent sat between the pines. Neither of them had noticed it the night before. Mark and Tyler walked slowly toward it. The tent flap was open. Inside was a sleeping bag, still warm, but there was no backpack, no supplies, no person anywhere in the woods, just the quiet forest and the empty tent. Spending the night deep in the woods can already feel unsettling, but sometimes the forest answers back, and that's when things become truly terrifying. This last story is called The Whistling in the Woods. Ethan had been hiking alone for most of the day. The trail wound through a dense section of forest in northern Idaho, far from towns or major roads. He had chosen the route specifically because it was quiet. No crowds, no busy campgrounds, just miles of narrow trails weaving through pine trees and rocky hills. By late afternoon, the sky had started turning orange through the branches, and Ethan realized he should probably start looking for a place to stop for the night. He stepped off the trail and found a small, flat patch of ground surrounded by trees. It wasn't much, but it would work. Ethan set up his small one-person tent, gathered a few fallen branches for a fire, and cooked a simple dinner beside the flames. As darkness slowly settled over the forest, the woods became completely silent. No wind, no animals moving nearby, just the soft crackle of burning wood. Ethan had just finished eating when he heard the first sound. A whistle, short, sharp. It echoed faintly somewhere in the trees. Ethan looked up from the fire and listened. Maybe another hiker nearby. People sometimes used whistles to signal their location on long trails, but after a few seconds, the forest returned to silence again. Ethan shrugged it off and began putting out the fire. As he packed away the cooking gear, the whistle came again. This time it sounded closer, a single note, high, clear, somewhere deeper in the woods behind him. Ethan turned slowly and stared into the dark trees. "Hello?" he called. No answer, just silence. After a moment, Ethan laughed quietly to himself. Maybe someone was just hiking late and trying to find the trail. Without thinking too much about it, he whistled once in response. The sound carried out into the forest. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then the whistle came back. Same tone, same pitch, but now it sounded much closer. Ethan felt a slight chill run down his neck. The response had come almost immediately. Whoever was out there had heard him. He waited a few seconds and then whistled again, a little louder this time. The forest stayed quiet. Then the answering whistle came back again, even closer. Now Ethan was certain someone was moving through the woods toward him. The distance between the whistles was shrinking. Whoever it was seemed to be walking slowly through the trees. Branches shifted softly somewhere beyond the darkness. Ethan grabbed his flashlight and pointed it toward the sound. The beam cut through the forest, but there was no one there. Ethan lowered the flashlight slightly. Then he heard it again, the whistle. This time it came from the opposite direction, somewhere behind him. He turned quickly, sweeping the light across the trees. Nothing moved. The woods looked completely empty. A strange feeling began building in Ethan's chest. Whoever was making the sound was moving around him, slowly circling the campsite just beyond the trees. He decided not to whistle again. Instead, he stood quietly, listening. The forest stayed silent for nearly a full minute. Then the whistle came again, right behind him. Ethan spun around instantly, raising the flashlight. The beam illuminated nothing but empty trees. No person, no animal, just the quiet forest staring back at him. His heart began beating faster now, because the whistle had been close. Very close. Ethan slowly backed toward the tent. Then something strange happened. From somewhere deep in the forest, he heard the whistle again. But this time, the sound was different. It wasn't a new whistle. It was his. The exact same note, the exact same pitch, the exact same sound Ethan had made earlier, repeating from the darkness of the woods, as if something out there had learned it. If you enjoy real unsettling stories like these, consider subscribing. And remember, sometimes the scariest things in the woods are the ones you never see.